My son's spit landed on my cheek, hot, stinging, and humiliating. The laughter of relatives froze, spoons and forks dangling mid-air, and the only sound was my coffee mug trembling against the table. Once a Father's Day gift, it now felt like a weapon in my shaking hand. It wasn't family tension anymore, it was a battlefield, and I was the target. But that was only the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where you're watching from right now. The morning after that shameful dinner, the house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen tiles, too bright, too sharp, almost intrusive. The coffee pot hissed and gurgled as it always did, yet there was no comfort in its sound. My hand reached for the chipped mug, the one he once painted clumsily in elementary school with the words, "World's Best Dad." Now, that phrase mocked me every time I looked at it. I filled it carefully, steam rising, fogging my glasses. I brought it to my lips, but even the taste was bitterer than usual, as though the humiliation of last night had seeped into the beans themselves. I set it down on the table, and the scrape of ceramic against wood felt louder than thunder. That's when I noticed him, my son, shuffling through the hallway, his voice low, his steps quick. He didn't greet me. He didn't even look at me. Just brushed past, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. I asked, calm but steady, "What did you say?" He didn't stop. He didn't answer. He disappeared into the living room, the sound of the television rising almost immediately, drowning me out. I gripped the mug tighter. Its chipped edge dug into my thumb. Once, he would have sat beside me, telling me about his day, asking me about mine. Now, silence stretched between us like a canyon. The daughter-in-law entered next, humming softly, tapping her phone as she moved. Her perfume lingered in the air, too sweet, too heavy. She glanced at the mug in my hand, smirked, and said, "Still clinging to that old thing?" I looked at her, jaw tightening. Some things are worth holding on to. She didn't reply. Just smiled thinly, as if I were a child talking nonsense. Then she opened the fridge, her back to me, and muttered something about people who don't know when to step aside. That cut deeper than the spit from the night before. I tried to focus on routine, washing the dishes, straightening the chairs, but even ordinary sounds felt tainted. The faucet's drip was too sharp. The creak of the old floorboard sounded like mocking laughter. Every detail screamed that something had shifted in this house, though no one had dared to speak it aloud. At one point, I stepped outside to the porch. The neighborhood looked normal, lawns freshly mowed, dogs barking faintly in the distance, kids pedaling bikes down the street. Yet even there, I felt eyes on me. Curtains moved, and for a moment I wondered if neighbors had already heard whispers from the night before. I went back inside, sat down, and stared at the mug. A memory flickered, my late wife's laughter echoing through this same kitchen, her hand brushing against mine as she poured coffee into that very mug. For a moment, warmth returned. But then I heard the television blast from the living room, my son laughing at some sitcom, and the warmth shattered. I carried the mug back to the sink, but before I set it down, I saw something strange. A small crack had formed near the handle overnight. I ran my finger over it, feeling the roughness. My chest tightened. That mug was me, still here, still standing, but chipped, ignored, and one careless move away from breaking. That night, as I tried to rest, I heard something unsettling. A faint rattle from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was just the pipes, the usual creaks of an old house. But when I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the kitchen, I saw it, my mug, trembling on the table, though no one was near it. The draft from the window, maybe. Or something else. Either way, I couldn't shake the thought, the house was no longer mine. That night, the mug rattled on the table, as if warning me. The following evening, the house filled with voices again. Relatives, cousins, uncles, even a few neighbors, had gathered for dinner. On the surface, it seemed like family tradition, but the air felt tight, suffocating. Laughter came in bursts, but it sounded forced, brittle, as if everyone sensed an invisible crack running through the walls. I carried my old mug with me, filled with lukewarm coffee, though I hardly drank. I kept it close, almost as if it were armor. Its chipped rim pressed against my palm as I sat quietly at the head of the table, the place where my wife once sat beside me, her presence making these gatherings feel alive. Without her, and after what had happened, the chair next to me felt like a void. My son sat across, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. He didn't look at me with respect anymore, only calculation. His wife leaned against him, whispering in his ear, her lips curving into a smile that wasn't warm but mocking. Dinner clattered on. Forks scraped plates. Conversations ebbed and flowed. But I caught fragments, old-fashioned, set in his ways, maybe time for change. Each phrase felt like a knife hidden inside polite chatter. Halfway through the meal, the silence broke. My son put his fork down with a deliberate clang. His voice cut across the room. "If you're going to keep living here," he said, staring straight at me, "it'll be on my terms." The room froze. A cousin dropped his spoon, the sound ringing like a bell. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. He leaned forward. "You don't get to keep running this house like it's yours. You either listen, or you leave." A sharp inhale spread across the table. My brother-in-law cleared his throat, as if to speak, then thought better of it. My daughter-in-law smirked, brushing her hair back with studied elegance. "Things change, William," she added smoothly. "You can't hold on forever." My hand tightened around the mug. I didn't drink. I didn't speak. But the ceramic grew hot in my grasp, as though reflecting the fire rising in me. From the corner of my eye, I saw my cousins exchange uneasy glances. One whispered, "Did he really just say that to his father?" Another muttered, "Shameful," in front of everyone. But no one spoke aloud. No one defended me. I tried to keep my voice steady. This house was built by my hands. Every brick, every board. You were raised under this roof. And now you tell me it's not mine? He smirked. "You're old. You've had your time. Now it's ours." The words hit harder than the spit had. Not because of their cruelty, but because of the eyes watching. My own family, blood of my blood, witnessing my erasure. The daughter-in-law placed her hand on his arm, her tone dripping false sweetness. "It's better this way, Dad. You'll be happier if you let go." I stared at her. "Happier? Watching you strip away my dignity piece by piece?" Silence followed. Only the tick of the old clock filled the room. Then, from the far end of the table, my nephew whispered to his mother, "Isn't that his mug? Why does he still carry it?" I heard it. I know others did too. My son's eyes darted to the mug, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "Look at him," he said loudly. "Still clutching that old cup like it's worth something. That chipped mug has more use than you, old man." The room gasped. Someone coughed awkwardly. My heart pounded, but I kept still. I lifted the mug slightly, staring into its dark contents, then set it down carefully, the sound echoing in the silence. "I may be chipped," I said softly, "but I'm not broken." That line hung in the air like smoke. But he didn't back down. He pushed his plate aside, his tone sharp. "Then make your choice. My terms, or the door." Everyone waited. The clinking of silverware had stopped entirely. No one moved. Even the children, restless minutes before, sat frozen, sensing the weight of the moment. I looked around at the faces, relatives I had fed, supported, sheltered over the years. None met my eyes directly. Shame burned hotter than anger. The betrayal wasn't only in his words, but in their silence. My daughter-in-law broke it with a laugh, light but cruel. Don't make it harder than it needs to be, Dad. You know he's right. I said nothing more. My throat tightened, words trapped like stones. I stood slowly, picked up the mug, and held it to my chest. Its crack pressed against my fingers, sharp and real, grounding me. The meal went on in uneasy fragments after that, but I didn't taste a thing. I sat in silence, sipping bitter coffee while whispers ran around me like wildfire. By the time the evening ended, I knew something had shifted forever. This wasn't an argument. This was exile in my own home. For the first time, I realized they weren't asking, they were erasing me. The next morning began with the familiar hiss of the coffee pot, but the comfort it once brought was gone. I poured into my chipped mug as always, but when I lifted it to my lips, I realized I hadn't even tasted the coffee in days. I only clutched it, as if it were the last piece of myself still intact. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pale morning light slanting through the blinds. The house was quiet, yet I felt no peace. My son came in, moving with an authority that wasn't his. He didn't nod, didn't greet me, just walked straight to the counter, pouring himself orange juice as if he owned everything in this room. He glanced at my mug and smirked. You know, Dad, maybe it's time you stopped worrying about small things and started thinking about what's best for everyone. I narrowed my eyes. And what exactly is best for everyone? He turned, leaning against the counter, the glass of juice glowing in the light. Consolidation. Efficiency. We need to combine accounts, put everything under one system. One signature, one access point. I felt my jaw tighten. My money is already organized. He shook his head, chuckling like I was a stubborn child. Not enough. You've got savings, pensions, insurance, too many loose ends. It's inefficient. I could streamline it. Before I could reply, his wife entered, her heels clicking against the tile. She joined in seamlessly, as if rehearsed. It's the smart move, Dad. Joint accounts. That way, if something happens to you, we won't have to fight through red tape. It'll all be seamless. I gripped the mug tighter, its handle digging into my palm. You mean it'll all be yours? Her smile didn't falter. Why make this ugly? We're family. We just want to help. But her eyes gleamed with calculation. I pushed the mug away and stood. I don't need help managing what I've built with my own hands. Not from you. Not from anyone. My son set his glass down harder than he meant to. Juice sloshed over the rim. You're being difficult. This isn't just about you, it's about us. About the future. Don't you care about your grandchildren? The word stung. I did care, deeply. But I knew a trap when I heard one. Don't use them as leverage. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. Then what good are you if you can't even secure their future? The killer line cut through me like ice. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked past him, mug in hand, and went straight to my study. I turned on the computer, heart pounding, unease crawling through my veins. Something told me this wasn't just talk. When I logged into my bank account, my stomach dropped. The numbers didn't add up. A withdrawal of $800, made yesterday afternoon. Not by me. Not authorized. I scrolled further. A few odd charges stood out, gas stations across town, purchases at stores I'd never stepped into. I set the mug beside the keyboard, my hands trembling. Coffee sloshed, leaving a dark stain on the papers scattered there. The mug now looked less like a symbol of comfort and more like a warning, its dark content spreading across everything I owned. I picked up the phone, called the bank. The clerk's voice was polite but uncertain. Yes, Mr. Thompson, we've seen some unusual activity. Someone attempted to link a new card to your account, a younger male. He had identification. We flagged it, but the withdrawal still went through. My chest tightened. Younger male. My son. I ended the call, staring at the cracked handle of the mug. For years, I'd believed that chip gave it character, a sign of survival. Now, it felt like an omen. That evening, when I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "It's not a big deal," he said, waving a hand. "I was testing access. Making sure I could handle things if you slipped." "Slipped?" I echoed. "You're getting older," he said coldly. "You can't keep track forever. Better to let me take over now, before something worse happens." I stared at him, mug in hand, and whispered, "You drained my account without asking." His wife stepped in quickly. "It was just a mistake. Don't overreact. You should be grateful he cares enough to handle this." Grateful. That word felt poisonous. I turned, walking away before my rage erupted. But inside, a storm gathered. They weren't asking, they were already taking. Piece by piece, sip by sip, they were draining me dry. That night, as I sat alone in my study, the mug beside me, I realized the truth. I wasn't just losing respect. I was losing control of everything I had built. But when I checked my account the next morning, numbers had already changed. The next evening, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a courtroom, and I was the accused. The dining table, once a place of warmth and laughter, had been cleared of food. Instead, papers were spread across its surface, documents, folders, legal forms I hadn't requested. My son stood at the head of the table, chin raised, eyes cold. His wife sat beside him, lips pressed in a thin line, her manicured finger tapping on the top sheet as though she were the judge presiding over my fate. I sat across from them, my chipped mug in front of me. It was half filled with coffee, though the liquid had gone cold. I hadn't touched it. Still, I kept it there. My anchor. My reminder of what had been stolen and what I still held on to. "Dad," my son began, his tone flat, "it's time to stop pretending. We need control of the accounts, the house, and the investments. These papers will make it easier for everyone." I looked down at the forms. Power of attorney. Access rights. My name typed neatly, with empty lines waiting for my signature. My voice was steady. "Why would I give you control of everything I built?" His jaw tightened. "Because you can't keep up anymore. You don't know how complicated it all is." "I do. I can handle it." His wife leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "He's right, Dad. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just sign, and all of this tension will disappear. You'll be comfortable. Secure. We'll handle the rest." I tapped the mug gently against the table. The soft thud echoed in the silence. "Secure, or erased." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Don't be dramatic. This is practical. Responsible." I met my son's gaze. "And if I say no?" His voice rose, sharper than before. "Then maybe it's time you moved out. Either sign, or leave." The room went silent. That was the ultimatum. Spoken clear, without disguise. The words landed heavier than any insult. This wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about responsibility. It was about control. I looked at him, at the boy I had raised into a man, and I saw nothing of the child who once handed me that mug with paint still wet on its sides. I saw only a stranger, standing in my house, demanding I surrender everything. My hand shook slightly as I lifted the mug. I sipped the cold, bitter liquid, not because I wanted it, but because I needed the silence it bought me. Then I set it down carefully. "You're serious," I said quietly. "As serious as it gets," he replied. His wife added, "We've already talked to a notary." It's just waiting for your signature. Don't make us push harder than this. For a long moment, I said nothing. Their eyes bore into me, expecting a protest, a breakdown, a plea. They wanted to see me crumble, to beg for scraps of the life I had built. Instead, I stood. Slowly, deliberately. I reached for the mug, held it for a moment, then set it down on the papers, the dark ring of coffee staining the edges of their carefully prepared forms. Their eyes widened, confused by the gesture. Without a word, I turned and walked to my room. My suitcase waited in the closet, covered in a thin layer of dust. I pulled it down, the zippers rasped loud in the silence. My hands moved methodically, shirts folded, socks tucked away, the photograph of my late wife slipped carefully between layers of clothing. And then, finally, I wrapped the mug in a sweater and placed it in the center of the case, cradled like something fragile but unbroken. As I packed, I heard their voices in the other room, angry, confused whispers. "Is he really doing it?" his wife hissed. "He's bluffing," my son replied. "He'll come crawling back once he realizes he can't live without us." I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound sliced through the silence like a verdict. When I emerged, suitcase in hand, they were waiting. My son stood in the hallway, arms crossed, trying to look dominant but betraying a flicker of unease. His wife leaned against the wall, smirking, though her eyes darted nervously. "You're leaving?" he asked, incredulous. I nodded. "You gave me two choices. I'm taking the one you never expected." He stepped forward. "Dad, don't be stupid. You can't just walk out." I looked at him calmly. "Watch me." His wife scoffed. "Where will you even go? A motel? You'll come running back the moment you get lonely." I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. Better lonely with dignity than surrounded by betrayal. The killer line landed, and for once, neither of them had a reply. I walked past them, my suitcase wheels rolling over the floorboards I had laid with my own hands decades ago. Each creak was a goodbye. At the door, I paused. I didn't look back, but I spoke one last time. "You wanted me gone. Don't forget, you asked for this." Then I stepped out, closing the door softly behind me. The night air hit me like a wave, cold and liberating. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing deeply, the suitcase by my side. Somewhere inside, my mug was packed away, a silent witness to everything that had just happened. They thought I would beg. Instead, I smiled, and zipped my suitcase. The motel room smelled of bleach and stale cigarettes. The walls were a dull beige, the curtains too thin to block the neon glow from the parking lot outside. A single lamp flickered on the nightstand, casting more shadows than light. I set the suitcase down carefully and pulled out the one object I couldn't leave behind, the chipped mug. I placed it on the table beside the bed. Empty now, but still mine. My anchor in a place that didn't yet feel real. The bed creaked as I sat, exhaustion pressing down on me. For years, I had lived in the same house, under the same roof. And now, in one night, I was in a motel that smelled of strangers. The silence was heavy, but it was mine. No laughter at my expense. No ultimatums. Just the faint hum of the ice machine down the hall. The next morning, I walked to the diner across the street. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and the smell of bacon clinging to the air. I ordered black coffee and set my mug down beside the one they brought me. 2 cups, one new, one old. One belonging to the world outside, the other to me. It didn't take long for whispers to reach my ears. A couple of men at the counter spoke just loud enough. "Heard William walked out last night." "Yeah. My nephew says his boy finally had enough of him. Old man lost his mind. Just packed up and left." Could hear the curiosity behind them. The gossip wasn't sympathy, it was spectacle. That evening, as I unpacked in the dim room, I heard faint voices outside my door. A couple walked past, laughing. One said, "Can you believe it? Thrown out by his own son." Their laughter faded down the hallway, but it lingered in my ears long after they were gone. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mug between my hands, and whispered to myself, "They think I've been thrown out. But they don't know me yet." It was then that my phone buzzed. An email notification. I opened it, expecting another neighbor's pity or one of my son's cruel messages. Instead, it was from a law office. The subject line froze me: "Notice of default inquiry, account holder, William Thompson." My heart pounded as I clicked it open. Inside was a letter, polite but cutting: "We have been notified of late payments and attempted loan activity linked to your property. Attached are documents reflecting authorization attempts under your name. Please confirm authenticity." I scrolled through the attachments. My breath caught. There it was, my name, my address, my signature. Only, it wasn't mine. The forged scrawl mocked me from the screen, slanted and jagged, an imitation that almost passed at first glance. Almost. My mug slipped slightly in my grip, hot coffee spilling onto my hand. The burn didn't matter. What mattered was the truth staring back at me: my son hadn't just disrespected me. He hadn't just demanded my dignity. He was stealing, slowly, methodically, everything I had built. I stood, pacing the small room, the neon light from outside flashing against the walls. Rage simmered, but beneath it, something else stirred. Not fear. Not despair. Strategy. They thought I'd broken. They thought a motel room and gossip would bury me. But the forged signature in that email told me something different. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight they couldn't win. Later that night, I sat at the motel desk, the mug beside me, the forged papers glowing on the screen. I whispered into the silence, "You wanted me erased. But now, you've written your own downfall." The mug cast a faint shadow on the desk, its cracked handle looping like a noose. When I opened it, I saw my own signature, but I never signed. By sunrise, the motel room had transformed into something else. No longer a place of exile, it was a war room. The desk was cluttered with papers, receipts, bank statements, insurance files. I spread them out carefully, like a general laying maps across a battlefield. My old mug sat in the center, chipped handle turned toward me, filled with dark coffee that had gone cold but remained untouched. It was my reminder, chipped, scarred, but still mine. The first step was the mortgage. For years, I had kept payments automated, smooth, invisible, because family was supposed to be trust. But now, with one deliberate keystroke, I cancelled the auto-transfer. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. I hovered, then pressed confirm. The sound of the mouse click was small, almost nothing. Yet in my chest, it echoed like a hammer striking steel. I whispered aloud, "One chain broken." The next step, the car insurance. My son had been driving my vehicle under my coverage, protected by my name. That ended today. I dialed the insurance company, the agent's voice chipper on the line. "Hello, Mr. Thompson, how can I help you today?" "I want to remove an authorized driver," I said. My voice was steady, cold. "Of course. Name?" I gave it. A few keystrokes later, the agent confirmed, "Done. Done." The word sent a quiet thrill through me. Another rope cut. Next came the credit accounts. I logged into the bank system, navigating to authorized users. There he was, his name tied to mine, sucking from my lifeline. With a few taps, I removed him. The system asked for confirmation. My finger hovered, then pressed enter. The screen refreshed. His name vanished. I sat back, exhaling slowly. 2 chains broken. I poured coffee into the mug, the steam fogging the chipped rim. I took a sip. For the first time in weeks, it didn't taste bitter. It tasted like freedom. Finally, I looked at the grocery transfers. Every month, I had been sending them money for food, for bills, for comfort. Sacrifices I made quietly, believing it was for family, for love. But love had been twisted into entitlement. I cancelled the recurring transfer. The screen blinked confirmation. 3 chains broken, I whispered. The room fell silent. No television, no laughter, no voices pressing me down. Only the steady hum of the motel air conditioner and the faint clink of my mug as I set it down. I stared at my account balance. For the first time in years, it wasn't drained by someone else's demands. It was mine. Fully mine. And in that moment, I realized something. They thought exile was punishment. But they had only freed me to fight back. I leaned back in the creaking motel chair, closing my eyes for a moment. Memories of my late wife surfaced, her voice urging me to stand taller, her hand slipping the painted mug across the table when our son was little. "Look, Dad, I made it for you. You'll always be the best." What would she say now, seeing the boy grown into a man who spit in my face, who forged my name, who tried to erase me? I opened my eyes, staring at the mug. The crack in its side caught the light like a scar. "You tried to erase me," I whispered into the empty room. "But every scar tells a story. And this one will be yours." I gathered the papers into neat stacks, sliding them into folders. The motel desk was cleared, orderly, ready for the next battle. By nightfall, the phone on the nightstand buzzed once. Twice. Then again. A cascade of missed calls, voicemails piling up. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. Anger. Confusion. Panic. I poured another coffee into the mug, sipping slowly, savoring the silence. The world outside that dingy motel was about to shift. Bills would bounce. Calls would come. Creditors would knock. And when it all unraveled, they would remember the one man they thought was broken, sitting in a cheap motel, drinking from a chipped mug, planning every move. By nightfall, their phones would ring, their bills would bounce, and my silence would be deafening. By Wednesday morning, the phone was buzzing before the sun had even cleared the motel's roofline. 12 missed calls. By Friday, that number had doubled. I sat at the motel's small desk, my chipped mug beside me, half filled with cooling coffee. The silence in the room was steady, peaceful. Outside, cars rolled by on the highway, their engines fading like distant waves. Inside, the only sound was the soft vibration of the phone against the table. I didn't answer. Not yet. Eventually, I pressed play on the first voicemail. My son's voice, sharp and angry, burst through the speaker. "Dad, the bank says the mortgage bounced. What the hell did you do? Call me back. Fix this." Click. The second was his wife, her tone dripping with irritation. "You can't just stop paying everything. That's irresponsible. We have bills, children. Do you want us to starve?" Click. The third came later that night, his voice louder, more desperate. "You think you're teaching us a lesson? You're just ruining your own family. Is that what Mom would have wanted?" At that, my hand trembled slightly on the mug's handle. He had dragged her memory into this. My wife, who had given everything to raise him, who would have wept to see what he'd become. I steadied myself, inhaling deeply, and deleted the message without a word. Day by day, the tone shifted. By Saturday morning, his anger had turned into cracks of fear. "Dad, please, just pick up the phone. We need to talk. The car insurance was cancelled, they won't even let me drive. What are you doing? This is crazy." Click. By Sunday, his wife's voice broke through, softer now, almost pleading. "William, please. We can work this out. The kids are scared. Don't do this to them. You're punishing everyone." Her words hung in the room, but I saw them for what they were, not pleas, but manipulation. If they cared about the children, they would never have dragged them into this war. I deleted that message too. Each time I pressed delete, the silence in the room grew sweeter. Each time, the mug felt steadier in my hand. Still, the outside world carried whispers. At the diner that afternoon, I caught fragments of a conversation from the booth behind me. Heard his son's credit cards got cut off. Must be some mistake. Or maybe the old man finally had enough. I stirred my coffee slowly, the spoon clinking against the chipped mug. When I glanced around, a few eyes darted away, pretending not to stare. Let them whisper. Let them guess. For once, the gossip wasn't a weight pressing on me, it was a weapon turning against them. Back at the motel, I listened to one last voicemail. This one came late, almost midnight. My son's voice was hoarse, unsteady. "You win, okay? Just, stop this. We can figure something out. Just pick up. Please." I sat in the dark room, the glow from the motel sign flickering through the thin curtains. The mug sat in front of me, casting a long shadow across the desk. I ran my thumb over the crack in its handle, steady, deliberate. I didn't call back. By Monday morning, the phone didn't just buzz, it rattled across the desk. A knock followed soon after. Hard. Urgent. I froze, staring at the door. Through the peephole, I saw them both. My son, his eyes wild, his jaw clenched. His wife beside him, pale but determined. The phone buzzed again in my hand. Their faces pressed closer to the door. Through the peephole, I saw them both, looking more desperate than I'd ever seen. A sharp knock rattled the motel door. The sound reverberated through the thin walls, louder than it should have been. I froze for a second, then set my chipped mug down on the dresser. Through the peephole, I saw my son. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched. Beside him, his wife shifted nervously, her smile gone, her hands clenched tight. I unlocked the latch but only cracked the door halfway. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice low, steady. He pushed against the door slightly, but I didn't move. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." His wife spoke first. "Dad, this has gone too far. The mortgage, the insurance, the cards, we can't survive like this. You're ruining us." I stared at her, unblinking. "You said it yourself. You wanted control. Now you have it. Control comes with consequences." My son's voice rose. "This isn't a game. You think cutting us off proves something? All you're doing is destroying your own family." I let the silence hang. Behind me, the mug sat on the dresser, catching the dim light from the lamp. Its shadow stretched long across the wall. "You gave me an ultimatum," I said finally. "Your terms, or the door." I chose the door. His face darkened. "Don't twist this. We just wanted what was fair." "Fair?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "Fair is asking, not stealing. Fair is respecting the man who gave you everything." The hallway fell silent. His wife's eyes darted to the mug on the dresser. "Still clutching that thing, huh?" she said softly, almost with pity. "It won't save you." I didn't answer her. Instead, I opened the door wider, letting them see the room, the papers stacked neatly on the desk, the laptop open, the evidence glowing on the screen. "Funny thing," I said, my voice calm, cutting. "The bank called me. They flagged an attempted loan application last week. $50,000. In my name. Using my house as collateral. For the first time, my son's mask slipped. His wife's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. What? He stammered, his voice breaking. It's not what it looks like. Isn't it? I stepped closer, holding a printed page from the email. The forged signature at the bottom gleamed under the motel's dim light. Because it looks a lot like fraud. And the signature looks a lot like mine. Except I never touched that pen. You lied to. It was her, too. His voice cracked. Dad, listen. No, I cut him off. You listen. You spat in my face. You told me this house wasn't mine. You tried to erase me. But fraud? Forgery? That's not just betrayal. That's a crime. The silence between us was louder than shouting. My son's chest heaved, his fists clenched at his sides. His wife stared at him with something new in her eyes, not loyalty, but suspicion. Finally, he snapped. You think you've won? You think you can just cut us off, expose me, humiliate me? You're old, Dad. Weak. You won't last on your own. And when you fall, no one will be there to catch you. I picked up the mug from the dresser, holding it in my hand. Its cracked handle pressed into my palm. I lifted it slowly, took a sip of the lukewarm coffee inside, then set it back down with a deliberate thud. You're wrong, I said. I'm not the one falling. His wife turned sharply to him. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you didn't forge his name. He didn't answer. His silence was its own confession. She stepped back from him, her breath quickening. You dragged me into this. Into lies. Into debt. My God. The tension crackled, heavy and raw. I knew I had struck the nerve I had been waiting for. He looked back at me, his voice low, trembling with rage. This isn't over. I stepped back into the room, hand still on the door. No. It isn't. I closed the door slowly, the latch clicking into place. Through the thin wood, his last words drifted to me, sharp and dangerous. I'll make you pay for this. You'll regret it. I leaned against the door, mug warm in my hand, my heart steady. His words weren't a plea anymore. They were a promise. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. His last words weren't a threat, they were a promise. And promises from desperate men are the most dangerous. The motel room felt smaller after their visit, the air thick with the echo of my son's last words. A promise of revenge. A promise of destruction. But promises only matter if they're backed by power. And his power was crumbling. I packed my papers into a worn leather folder, sliding the printed email with the forged signature into the front sleeve. Before closing the case, I tucked my chipped mug carefully inside, wrapped in a sweater. Not because I needed it for coffee, but because I needed it as a reminder, dignity could be carried, even into battle. The lawyer's office was downtown, a brick building with old oak doors and the smell of dust and ink. I sat in the waiting area, folder in hand, while the secretary tapped on her keyboard with disinterest. My reflection stared back at me from the glass cabinet across the room, older, wearier, but no longer beaten. When they finally called my name, I entered a modest office. Papers lined the desk, law books towered on the shelves. The man behind the desk was gray-haired, spectacles perched on his nose. His voice was calm, deliberate. Mr. Thompson, what can I do for you? I laid the folder on the desk and opened it. The forged documents slid out like knives. I need protection. And I need justice. He studied the papers carefully, eyebrows knitting as he traced the fake signature. This is serious. Whoever did this wasn't careless. They knew your personal details, your property records. I nodded once. My son. He hesitated. Are you certain? As certain as I am that this crack in my mug wasn't there until he betrayed me, I said, setting the mug on the edge of his desk. The lawyer glanced at it, then back at me, understanding the weight behind the gesture. He leaned back in his chair. We can pursue several avenues. Fraud charges. Revocation of access to all shared accounts. But if he's been living in your property. He has, I interrupted. And he told me to leave. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Then eviction proceedings are an option. You would regain full possession, legally enforced. I stared at the forged signature again, my jaw tight. Do it. File the eviction. File the restraining order. File whatever it takes. I want him out of my house, and I want every door closed to him that has my name on it. The lawyer studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. This won't be easy. He'll fight. Let him, I said. He started a war. I intend to finish it. The next 2 hours blurred into paperwork. I signed forms, initialed here, confirmed there. Each signature I placed was a declaration, a counterstrike. When the last page slid across the desk, the lawyer stamped it with a heavy seal. The sound rang through the room like a gavel. It's official, he said. By tomorrow, the sheriff will deliver notice. He'll have no legal standing in your home. I exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks lifting from my chest. My mug sat on the desk, casting a shadow across the signed papers. For the first time, it didn't look like a chipped relic. It looked like proof of survival. As I packed the mug back into my case, the lawyer leaned forward, his voice softer. Mr. Thompson, are you sure you want to do this? Against your own son? I paused, my hand resting on the mug's cracked handle. He stopped being my son the moment he tried to erase me. This isn't about blood anymore. It's about dignity. The lawyer nodded solemnly. Then we'll fight. When I left the office, the city air hit me sharp and clean. I stood for a moment on the steps, folder under one arm, mug in the other. People passed by without notice, but inside, I felt taller, steadier. That night in the motel, I placed the mug on the desk beside the stamped eviction notice. The paper glowed under the lamp, crisp and undeniable. I whispered into the empty room, tomorrow, the sheriff walks to their door. Tomorrow, the house remembers who built it. The mug's shadow stretched long across the paper, binding past and present together. By tomorrow, the sheriff would carry my papers to their door. The morning after I left the lawyer's office, the motel felt lighter. For weeks, I had carried humiliation like a stone on my back, but now the weight was shifting. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was striking back. I sat at the desk, sipping coffee from my chipped mug, when my phone buzzed with a message. Not from my son. Not from his wife. From an old friend, a banker I had known for decades. William, you might want to hear this. Stop by. I finished my coffee, slipped the mug into my case, and drove downtown. His office overlooked Main Street, a modest building with glass walls and rows of cubicles buzzing with quiet tension. When he saw me, he closed his door immediately, his face grim. Your son's in trouble, he said without preamble. I leaned back in the chair, folding my arms. I know. I've seen the forged papers. He shook his head. It's more than that. Creditors have been calling the bank all week. He took out loans he can't repay. Maxed cards. Gambling debts. The words hit, but they didn't surprise me. I had seen the signs, the late nights, the hidden expenses, the constant excuses. My friend slid a file across the desk. Inside were notices, statements, collection warnings. My son's name on every page. His facade is breaking, the banker said. And soon, the whole community will know. I ran my hand over the file, then set it aside. My mug sat on the corner of the desk, its crack catching the office light. I whispered, "The truth always comes out." That afternoon, I heard it spreading like wildfire. At the hardware store, two men whispered near the paint aisle. "Did you hear? His son owes thousands. Gambling. Always thought he lived too good for his paycheck. Apple doesn't fall far, I guess." They didn't notice me standing at the end of the aisle, the mug tucked under my arm. I walked past without a word, but inside, I felt the shift. For weeks, I had been the subject of whispers. Now the tide was turning. By evening, the cracks widened. My phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail from my daughter-in-law. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "William, you don't understand. He lied to me. About the loans, the money, all of it. Creditors are calling non-stop. They showed up at his work today. Please, you have to help us." I deleted the message without replying. Later that night, I sat at the motel desk, mug in hand, staring at the eviction notice. I could almost picture the sheriff handing it to my son, his confidence draining, his mask slipping. The next morning, the news came faster. At his workplace, debt collectors had shown up. Coworkers whispered. His boss, once proud of him, called him into the office. By noon, he was out, fired, reputation in tatters. I heard the story from 3 different sources before the day ended. Each version carried the same tone, pity mixed with disgust. At the diner, the waitress poured me coffee, nodding slightly. "Heard about your boy," she said softly. "Guess folks are finally seeing the truth." I lifted my mug, sipped slowly, and replied, "Truth has a way of showing itself." By nightfall, I knew it wasn't just about money anymore. His entire facade, the image of the responsible son, the dutiful husband, the man in control, had collapsed. What remained was desperation, and desperation is dangerous. I sat in the motel, the mug warm in my hands, whispering into the silence, "This is only the beginning." And that was only the beginning of their downfall. Sunday morning. The church bells rang out across town, steady and solemn. I hadn't stepped into that building since my wife's funeral, but something pulled me there that day. Maybe it was the whispers I'd heard all week. Maybe it was the way the mug felt warm in my hands as I poured my coffee, steadying me for what was coming. I walked through the heavy wooden doors, nodding to familiar faces. Some smiled politely, others hesitated, their eyes flickering with a new kind of respect. A few months ago, they had whispered about me, poor William, losing control, thrown out by his own boy. Now, they whispered about him. I sat near the back, my mug tucked carefully under my coat. Old habit, I couldn't leave it behind. The choir sang, voices rising, but my attention drifted as the door creaked open again. They walked in together. My son and his wife. Their faces were pale, drawn tight. His suit was wrinkled, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept. The congregation turned to look. Murmurs rippled through the pews. "That's him, the one with the loans. Heard he lost his job. Lied to his own father, forged papers." The words carried, sharp and cutting. He stiffened as they reached a pew, trying to hold his head high, but the whispers followed like shadows. His wife sat down quickly, her hands trembling in her lap. The pastor began the sermon, speaking of forgiveness, of truth, of how deceit corrodes families. His words weren't aimed at anyone in particular, but every head seemed to turn toward them. Even he noticed, his voice faltering for a moment before continuing. I watched from the back, silent. My mug pressed against my side under the coat, its crack digging into my palm like a reminder, justice doesn't always shout, it waits, then speaks when the time is right. When the service ended, the real judgment began. People gathered in small groups outside the church. I lingered near the steps, my mug in hand now, steam curling from it as the cool morning air bit at our faces. I heard it all. Disgraceful. His poor children. She stood by while he lied. He spit on his own father, and look where it got him. My son's face turned red as he pulled his wife through the crowd, but the crowd closed in. An old neighbor, Mrs. Carter, stepped forward, shaking her head. "You had the nerve to humiliate your father in front of all of us," she said, voice trembling with anger. "And now? Now we see what kind of man you are." He opened his mouth, but no words came. His wife looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. Another man, a deacon, muttered, "You can't run from the truth, son. Everyone sees it now." The whispers became a storm. Heads turned, voices rose. They weren't just gossiping anymore, they were condemning. And then, something I hadn't expected happened. People turned toward me. "William," one said, "we're sorry we believed their lies. You never deserved that. You're stronger than all of us realized." I felt the heat of their eyes, the weight of their respect. For the first time in months, I wasn't the subject of pity. I was the man who had endured, who had stood silently while the truth revealed itself. My son couldn't take it. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You don't understand. He abandoned us, he left us with nothing." The crowd went still. I lifted the mug slightly, letting the steam curl into the air. My voice was calm, steady. "I left with nothing," I said, "because you told me to. But dignity isn't nothing. And dignity can't be stolen." The line cut through the silence like a blade. Even the pastor lowered his head, murmuring a soft amen. My son's wife broke then. She turned away from him, covering her face with her hands, sobbing quietly as neighbors pulled her aside. He stood alone on the steps, surrounded but isolated, his mask finally stripped away. I turned to leave. The mug was warm in my hand, the sunlight glinting off its chipped rim. For once, the whispers didn't sting, they steadied me. As I walked down the church steps, I heard his voice behind me, low and broken. "This isn't over, Dad." I didn't stop walking. Outside the church, I realized, the fight wasn't finished. Desperation makes men dangerous, and his desperation had only just begun. The church whispers still echoed in my mind as I sat in the motel room that night, the eviction notice spread across the desk, the mug at my side. But I knew whispers alone wouldn't end this war. Whispers fade. Paper speaks. That's when the lawyer called. His voice was tight, urgent. "Mr. Thompson, I've uncovered something. You should come in." I drove downtown, the streets empty, headlights cutting through the dark. My hands gripped the wheel, my mug resting in the passenger seat like a silent witness. In his office, the lawyer pushed a folder across the desk. "It's worse than we thought. They didn't stop at bank loans." Inside the folder lay a deed. My property deed. Or at least, a copy of it. My name was there, my address, every detail exact. But the signature, again, it wasn't mine. "They filed this at the county office," the lawyer said. "If it had gone through, they'd have legal claim to your home. It's fraud on a massive scale." My stomach turned, but my resolve hardened. "And if we expose this?" The lawyer's eyes gleamed behind his glasses. "It won't just be gossip anymore. It'll be evidence. Public. Undeniable." I lifted the deed, running my thumb over the ink. My hand trembled, not with fear, but with rage restrained for too long. I set it down beside my mug. The crack in its handle caught the fluorescent light, and for a moment, it looked like the mug itself was smiling. "Then it's time," I whispered. "Time to end this." The next morning, I walked into the courthouse. The hall smelled of paper and polish, voices echoing off marble walls. My footsteps were steady, each one a declaration. The folder was tucked under my arm, the mug in my hand. The clerk eyed me strangely as I placed both on the counter. Filing? Evidence, I said. She flipped through the pages, her brows rising. Forgery this blatant, the sheriff will prioritize this immediately. By afternoon, the sheriff himself arrived at the courthouse, his boots heavy on the tile. He picked up the folder, flipping through it, then looked at me. "You're sure about this?" I nodded once. "As sure as I've ever been." He tapped the deed against the counter. "Then tomorrow, we put this in front of them. Publicly." And so it was set. The next day, the town gathered at the courthouse steps, neighbors, relatives, even strangers drawn by the storm of rumors that had been swirling for weeks. My son arrived, defiant but pale, his wife trailing behind, eyes darting nervously. The sheriff stepped forward, holding the folder high. His voice rang out across the crowd. "William Thompson has provided evidence of forgery and fraud committed in his name. These documents," he lifted the deed, "prove an attempt to steal his property through false signatures." Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to my son. His face drained of color. He shook his head violently. "It's a lie. He's making this up." But the sheriff wasn't done. He held up the forged papers, the signature visible even from a distance. "This was filed at the county office. This is criminal." Whispers surged. "He forged his own father's deed, to steal the house, shameless." His wife took a step back, her hand over her mouth. For the first time, she looked at him not as a partner, but as a stranger. I stepped forward then, mug in hand, raising my voice just enough to carry. "You wanted to erase me. To take my home, my name, my dignity. But dignity can't be forged. And today, the truth signs its own name." The crowd erupted, gasps, nods, murmurs of agreement. My son lunged forward, his voice breaking. "Dad, stop this. Don't do this to me." I met his eyes, calm and unshaken. "You did this to yourself." The sheriff's men closed in, their presence firm, unyielding. My son looked around desperately, but no one stepped forward to help him. Not his wife. Not his cousins. Not a single neighbor. For the first time, he was truly alone. I raised the mug slightly, letting the morning sun catch its cracked handle. The crowd's eyes followed. To them, it was just a cup. To me, it was victory, proof that what they tried to shatter had endured. The sheriff folded the papers and tucked them away. "We'll proceed with charges." And eviction. My son's shoulders sagged, his fight gone. I turned, my voice carrying one last time. "This ends here. Not with fists. Not with spit. With truth." The forged deed lay in the sheriff's hands, and tomorrow it would bury the last of my son's lies. The courthouse echoed with voices that morning, a low murmur that rose and fell like waves. The sheriff's announcement had already spread through town, and by now everyone knew, my son had forged my signature, tried to steal my house, and failed. I sat in the back row, my chipped mug beside me on the wooden bench. The air smelled of old paper and polished wood. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a drumbeat counting down to judgment. When the bailiff called his name, my son entered the room. His shoulders hunched, his eyes bloodshot. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, less a man, more a boy caught in his own lies. His wife trailed behind, her makeup streaked from tears. The judge's voice was steady, formal. "The evidence is clear. Fraudulent activity has been confirmed. Property rights remain with William Thompson. Eviction proceedings will be enforced immediately. Further charges may follow." The gavel struck once, and it was done. The crowd erupted in whispers, some leaning toward me with nods of respect. "Justice," I heard one man say. "About time," another whispered. but I hardly noticed them. My eyes were fixed on my son. He turned toward me then, his face pale, his lips trembling. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, he walked down the aisle of the courtroom, each step heavier than the last. When he reached me, his knees buckled. He collapsed onto the wooden floor, right there in front of neighbors, friends, strangers. "Dad," his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. Please. I made mistakes, I was wrong. Don't let them take everything. Please, help me." The room fell silent. Even the shuffling stopped. All eyes turned toward me. I looked down at him, my son, kneeling at my feet, begging. The same man who had spat on my face. Who had told me to leave my own home. Who had tried to erase me with a pen. The mug was warm in my hand. I lifted it slightly, feeling its cracked handle press into my palm. "You told me once," I said quietly, "that this house wasn't mine. That I had no place left. You wanted me erased. And now you kneel?" His tears spilled freely. "I didn't mean it. I was angry. I thought I was protecting my family." His wife sobbed quietly beside him, her hands covering her face. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. Then I set the mug back down on the bench with a firm thud. "Forgiveness is possible," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "But trust? Trust is gone. And without trust, you have nothing." His eyes widened, desperate. "Please, Dad. I'll do anything, just give me one more chance." I shook my head slowly. "You already had your chance. You spat on it. You forged it. You buried it." The crowd was silent, every breath held. Finally, I stood, the mug in my hand. I looked at the judge, then at the sheriff, then back at my son. "You wanted control. Now you have none. You wanted power. Now you are powerless. And that, son, is the future you chose." He bowed his head, shoulders shaking. His wife leaned away from him, her body trembling, as if even she couldn't stand beside him anymore. The bailiff stepped forward, touching his shoulder lightly. He didn't resist. I turned, walking slowly down the aisle, the mug steady in my hand. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from shame, but from the weight of fatherhood itself. Justice carried a cost, and the cost was watching my own blood crumble. At the door, I paused, speaking one last time without looking back. "Forgiveness, maybe. But never again will you have my trust." As they were led away, the crowd turned to me, not with pity, but with respect. The courthouse steps were crowded that afternoon. Neighbors, relatives, even strangers lingered, their voices buzzing like bees in the autumn air. But this time, the whispers weren't knives cutting at me. They were shields. He stood tall. Didn't break. Even after all they did, he never lowered himself. I gripped my mug in one hand, the warm ceramic steady against my palm. The chipped handle pressed like an old scar, no longer painful, just proof that it had endured. As I walked down the steps, heads turned. People nodded, some even clapped softly. Mrs. Carter, the neighbor who once pitied me, leaned forward with tears in her eyes. "We were wrong about you, William. You didn't deserve what they did." I simply nodded, words caught in my throat. At the bottom of the steps, the sheriff approached, papers in hand. "It's official. The eviction is complete. The house is yours again." I took the documents slowly, sliding them into my case. My son was nowhere in sight, escorted out the side door, away from the crowd. His wife, too, had vanished into the blur of shame. They weren't the story anymore. I was. But victory, I learned, doesn't always feel sweet. I stopped at the diner on the way back to the motel. The waitress poured me a fresh cup, but I slid it aside and placed my own mug in front of her. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't trust anyone else's cup," she teased. I smiled faintly. "This one's been through enough." "So have I." The regulars at the counter turned, offering quiet nods of respect. No more whispers of pity. No more gossip behind my back. Only acknowledgement. Later, back at the motel, I packed my suitcase. The eviction notice lay folded neatly at the bottom. On top of it, wrapped in a sweater, sat the mug. The last item to go in, the first to come out when I stepped back into my house. When I unlocked my front door the next morning, the silence inside was heavy. Furniture remained, but the air was different. Emptied of deceit. Cleansed by truth. I carried the suitcase to the kitchen, setting it on the old wooden table. From inside, I pulled the mug and placed it carefully where it had always belonged. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, catching the crack in its side, turning it golden. For a moment, I stood there, staring at it. I thought of my wife, of the boy my son once was, of the man he had become. The cost of victory pressed against me, justice won, but family lost. I poured fresh coffee, filling the mug to the brim. I lifted it slowly, the steam curling upward like a prayer. And then, I walked out to the porch. Neighbors waved from across the street. Some called out greetings. For the first time in months, I returned the wave, mug raised high. They saw me, not broken, not erased, not pitted. Seen. Respected. But as I sat in the old rocking chair, the mug warm in my hands, the chair beside me stayed empty. No son. No wife. Just me and the echoes of a life that had changed forever. The mug was solid, steady, even with its scar. So was I. The mug was warm in my hands, but the seat across from me stayed empty, proof that victory always carries a cost.